Nurse slaps a black mom holding her baby. 10 minutes later she fires entire staff. Denise was a young black mother who had just given birth a few weeks ago. Life after delivery had been a mixture of joy and exhaustion. Her newborn baby kept her awake most nights, and she was still adjusting to the endless cycle of feeding, burping, rocking, and changing diapers. Despite the tiredness written all over her face, there was love in her eyes every time she looked at her child. That morning, she dressed in simple clothes, tied her hair back, and carried her baby in a soft blanket. She needed to take him to the hospital for a routine checkup, something she had been both nervous and hopeful about. The hospital building looked large and intimidating as she approached it. She had been there before, but never as a mother bringing her own child. The smell of antiseptic floated through the air as she pushed the glass door open. The waiting area was filled with people, some flipping through old magazines, others scrolling on their phones, and a few mothers rocking their children just like her. Denise held her baby close to her chest, whispering to him softly to calm him. The child stirred, then rested his tiny head against her shoulder. As she approached the reception desk, her heart raced a little. She knew she had forgotten some paperwork at home in the rush of preparing for the visit. The receptionist, a young man with glasses, asked for her documents. Denise explained gently, her voice calm but tired, that she had left some forms at home but could provide identification. He nodded and asked her to take a seat while he checked with the nurses. She sat on one of the stiff plastic chairs, rocking her baby, and tried to stay calm. Minutes later, a nurse appeared. She was tall, with her hair tied tightly in a bun, and her face carried an expression of impatience. She scanned the room until her eyes fell on Denise. With firm steps, she walked over and asked for the papers. Denise again explained politely, apologizing for not having everything but assuring her she had the essentials. Instead of understanding, the nurse frowned deeply. "You mothers need to learn responsibility," she muttered, loud enough for people around to hear. Denise's cheeks grew hot, but she chose to stay silent, rocking her baby and hoping things would not get worse. The nurse continued speaking in a sharp tone. She asked why Denise had come unprepared, why she expected others to help her when she hadn't done her part. Her words cut like small blades, each one making Denise feel smaller. Some patients nearby turned to look, curious and uncomfortable. Denise held her baby tighter, whispering softly to him, trying to keep her own tears from falling. She thought to herself that perhaps the nurse was just having a bad day. She tried to excuse the behavior in her mind, telling herself to stay calm for her child's sake. But the nurse wasn't finished. She gestured toward the door and said maybe Denise should return when she had all the documents in order. Denise tried to explain again, her voice a little shaky now, that her baby needed care today. The nurse rolled her eyes, crossed her arms, and spoke even louder. "You people always expect exceptions. Rules are rules." The words stung. Denise lowered her gaze, embarrassed, as the baby stirred and began to whimper. The small sound of the baby's cry filled the tense silence. Denise rocked him gently, trying to soothe him, but the nurse's irritation grew. She sighed dramatically, tapping her foot as though every second wasted was a crime. "If you can't even keep your child calm, how do you expect us to help you?" she snapped. The cruel remark made Denise's heart ache. She pressed her lips together, fighting the rising lump in her throat. Around them, people in the waiting room whispered. Some looked shocked at the nurse's tone, but no one spoke up. Denise noticed but didn't judge them. After all, who wants to get involved in conflict? She wished someone would say something, but she also understood their silence. Her mind raced with 100 thoughts. Should she leave? Should she stay? Should she argue back? She thought of her baby's health and reminded herself that this checkup mattered more than her pride. So she stayed seated, whispering calm words to her child while trying not to cry. What the nurse didn't know was that Denise was no ordinary patient. She was not just a tired mother struggling to adjust. Life had changed for her in ways the staff could never imagine. Through family inheritance and business decisions, she had recently become the owner of the hospital chain itself. But she had walked in today simply as a mother, without revealing her status, hoping to experience what every patient experienced. She wanted to see the truth of how patients were treated. And now, she was seeing it with painful clarity. The ticking of the wall clock echoed in her ears as minutes passed. Each second felt heavy. The nurse stood nearby, still glaring, still muttering under her breath, unaware that her behavior was digging her own grave. Denise rocked her baby, her mind swirling between emotions. Part of her felt broken and humiliated. Another part of her began to awaken a calm, steady power she had not expected to feel in this moment. She thought of all the patients who must have suffered in silence before her. She thought of the mothers who had come in scared, only to be met with cruelty. She thought of the values her late parents had taught her: kindness, fairness, respect for every human being. Her baby finally settled again, closing his eyes. Denise kissed his forehead softly and let out a slow breath. She knew something bigger was about to unfold. She did not yet reveal her identity, but inside she had already decided that this day would not end the way the nurse imagined. The waiting room remained tense, whispers floating from corner to corner. People sensed that something unusual was about to happen. Denise sat still, her baby in her arms, her eyes calm yet determined. In that moment, though she looked like a simple, tired mother, she carried the quiet strength of someone who could change everything. That was how the morning began: one mother, one baby, one nurse, and one hospital where the truth of people's hearts would soon be revealed. Denise sat in the stiff chair, holding her baby close, trying to keep calm as the nurse's eyes burned into her. She hoped the woman would simply walk away, but the opposite happened. The nurse, already frowning, seemed to lose all patience. In an instant that no one expected, her hand flew up, and before Denise could react, the nurse slapped her across the face. The sound echoed in the quiet waiting room. Denise's head turned slightly from the force, but what hurt more was not the sting on her cheek, it was the humiliation that came with it. She was a mother holding her tiny child, and yet she had been treated with no respect, no compassion, and no humanity. The baby startled from the sudden movement and burst into loud cries, his tiny body trembling in Denise's arms. Denise's arms instinctively wrapped tighter around him, rocking him gently, whispering, it's okay, mommy's here." Her cheek burned, her eyes filled with tears, but she focused on calming her child. Around her, gasps filled the air. Patients who had been sitting silently moments before were now wide-eyed, their mouths open in shock. Some covered their lips with their hands, others exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers quickly spread in the room. "Did she just slap her?" someone murmured. "In front of the baby," another whispered. A few people pulled out their phones, unsure if they should record what had just happened. But fear of the hospital authority kept most of them frozen in their seats. The nurse, breathing heavily, stood with her arms crossed, as if she had done nothing wrong. "You need to learn how to behave," she snapped. "You come here unprepared, disturbing everyone with your crying baby, and then expect us to just bend the rules for you. Not here." Her voice was sharp, cutting, and filled with anger. Denise blinked back tears, still rocking her baby. She could hardly believe what had just happened. A nurse, someone trained to heal and comfort, had struck her while she was holding her child. The sting on her cheek was real, but what hurt even more was the cruel disrespect, the deep sense of being judged, shamed, and dismissed. In that moment, time felt slow. Denise's mind replayed everything: the rude remarks, the harsh tone, and now the slap. She felt anger rising inside, but it was not loud or uncontrolled. It was a steady flame, calm and powerful. She thought not only of herself but of every mother, every patient who had been mistreated in these halls. If this happened to her, how many others had suffered quietly? The baby's cries slowly softened as Denise whispered soothing words. She kissed his forehead gently, her own tears sliding down her cheek. The room remained tense. Some patients shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from Denise to the nurse, waiting to see what would happen next. One older woman, seated across the room, shook her head in disbelief and muttered, "Shameful, truly shameful." The nurse, perhaps realizing that people were watching, tried to justify her actions. "This is a professional place," she said loudly. "If patients don't respect the system, we can't run things properly. Rules are rules." Her words hung in the air, cold and defensive. Denise finally lifted her eyes. She did not shout. She did not argue. Instead, she spoke in a steady, soft voice that carried more weight than anger ever could. "You put your hand on me while I was holding my child," she said. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. This is not how a nurse should treat anyone." The nurse scoffed, but the unease in her posture showed cracks of doubt. Perhaps a part of her realized she had gone too far. Yet her pride would not allow her to admit it. She turned away, muttering under her breath, refusing to meet Denise's eyes. Unknown to everyone in that room, Denise was not simply a mother seeking a checkup. She was the new owner of the hospital chain, a woman who had the power to shape the future of every staff member in that building. She had chosen to come quietly, without revealing her identity, to see the hospital through the eyes of an ordinary patient. What she had witnessed cut deeply into her heart. This was not just about her, it was about the culture of cruelty and neglect that had been allowed to exist in a place meant for healing. Her mind shifted quickly from pain to decision. She thought of her baby's future, of the patients sitting quietly in the room, and of the countless families who walked through these doors every day, trusting this place with their lives. She could not let this behavior continue. Something had to change, and it had to change today. Denise stood up slowly, cradling her baby in her arms. Her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gazes of those who had watched in silence. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others nodded slightly, as if urging her to take a stand. The nurse crossed her arms, still trying to appear in control, but her face showed a flicker of nervousness. With calm steps, Denise walked toward the front desk. The receptionist, who had seen everything, swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. Denise spoke softly but firmly. "I would like to see the hospital director," she said. The receptionist hesitated. "Ma'am, the director is very busy. Perhaps you can file a complaint." Denise looked at him directly. "This is not a complaint," she said. "This is something bigger. Please call the director." There was something in her tone, a quiet authority that could not be ignored. The receptionist quickly picked up the phone and made the call. Within minutes, word spread through the corridors. Staff whispered among themselves, wondering why a simple patient was demanding the attention of the director. Back in the waiting room, the nurse's confidence began to waver. She shifted from foot to foot, her face pale now. The other patients whispered more loudly, some saying, "She shouldn't have done that." "Not in front of everyone." The nurse avoided their eyes, her pride shrinking as reality sank in. Denise remained calm. She did not raise her voice, she did not create a scene. She simply stood, holding her baby close, waiting. Inside her heart, she knew that the next few minutes would define not only her experience but the future of the hospital itself. She kissed her baby's forehead once more, whispering, "We're okay. Mommy's here." The child stirred, comforted by her steady arms. Denise's face, though still marked by the sting of the slap, now carried a look of determination. In that quiet, charged atmosphere, no one could have guessed the truth that the young mother standing before them was the very person who held the power to change everything. And within 10 minutes, the hospital staff would learn a lesson they would never forget. ChatGPT said. Denise stood tall in the waiting area, her baby resting in her arms. The sting of the slap still lingered on her cheek, but inside her heart something had shifted. She was no longer just a tired mother trying to get through a hospital visit. She was a woman who had just witnessed the truth about how patients were treated when no one was watching. The whisper of authority in her voice had already made the receptionist nervous. And now, with the phone call to the hospital director made, the tension in the room grew heavier with each passing second. People in the waiting area whispered among themselves. Some leaned closer to their neighbors, quietly repeating what they had seen. "Did you see what that nurse did?" one man muttered. "She hit her while she was holding her baby." Another woman shook her head. "If they can treat her like that in front of everyone, imagine how they treat people when no one is watching." The nurse, the very one who had slapped Denise, shifted uncomfortably by the wall. She no longer looked confident. Her arms were still crossed, but her eyes darted around nervously as though she wanted to escape the room. Within minutes, the sound of shoes clicking on the tiled floor echoed from down the hallway. A middle-aged man in a gray suit appeared. His badge identified him as the hospital director. Behind him trailed a few staff members, curious and anxious about why they had been summoned so suddenly. The director's eyes scanned the waiting room until they landed on Denise, standing with quiet dignity, her baby pressed against her shoulder. The director approached. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I understand there's a situation. How can I help you?" His tone was professional but cautious. He had no idea yet who Denise really was. He saw only a mother holding a child, though her calm gaze unsettled him. Denise nodded slightly. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was low but carried strength. "There has been a situation. A nurse put her hand on me while I was holding my baby." The director's face tightened in disbelief, and his eyes flicked to the staff standing behind him. Some looked away, others swallowed hard. Denise continued, "And many of your staff stood by silently, watching, doing nothing. This is not the care people deserve when they come here seeking help." The nurse finally spoke, her voice trembling. "It wasn't like that. She came unprepared. She didn't have the proper paperwork, and she was making a scene." Denise turned her eyes toward her, silencing her instantly. There was no anger in her look, only an authority that made the nurse falter. "The only scene made today," Denise said firmly, "was your slap. Nothing else matters after that." The director's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew this was serious. Already, he could feel the judgment in the room from the patients who had witnessed everything. He started to stammer an apology. "Ma'am, I'm deeply sorry. This behavior is unacceptable, and we will..." But before he could finish, Denise gently shifted her baby in her arms and raised her free hand. "I think it's time I explain something," she said. The room grew quiet. Even the whispers faded. The receptionist behind the desk leaned forward, listening. Denise looked around the room at the faces staring back at her, patients, staff, and the director. She took a slow breath. "I am not just here today as a mother. I am also the new owner of this hospital. The chain was recently acquired, and I was appointed chairwoman." Her words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the room. The director's jaw dropped. The staff members glanced at each other in disbelief. Even the patients shifted in their seats, stunned by the revelation. The nurse who had slapped her felt her legs weaken. Her face drained of color, and her eyes widened. She stuttered, You're the owner." Her voice was barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. Denise nodded. "Yes. And I came here today quietly, as an ordinary mother, because I wanted to see how people are treated in this hospital when they don't have titles, wealth, or influence. What I saw broke my heart." She looked down at her baby for a moment, brushing her lips gently against his head before lifting her gaze again. If this is how you treat a mother with her newborn, I cannot even imagine how you treat others who are older, weaker, or without a voice. The director looked horrified. He tried to speak, but Denise raised her voice slightly, not loud, but clear enough to cut through the silence. I asked for the staff on duty to be gathered here, she said firmly. I want everyone who was present to hear this. Bring them all. The director quickly nodded and gave instructions. Within minutes, more nurses, assistants, and administrative staff arrived, crowding into the main hall of the hospital. The air was thick with tension. Everyone now knew the truth: the woman who had been mistreated was the one person who could decide all of their futures. Denise stood in the center of the hall, her baby in her arms, her back straight. She looked at the gathered staff, their faces a mixture of fear, shame, and uncertainty. Some of them had witnessed the slap and done nothing. Others had joined in with dismissive comments earlier. Now they waited, holding their breath, wondering what she would say. Denise's eyes scanned the crowd slowly. She felt the weight of the moment. She thought of her own pain, of the sting on her cheek, but she also thought of something much larger: the dignity of every patient who walked through these doors. Her voice, calm yet powerful, filled the room. Hospitals are meant to heal, she began. They are meant to be places of comfort, care, and respect. Patients come here vulnerable, frightened, and in need of kindness. Yet today, I was met with cruelty. And worse, many of you stood by silently, watching, saying nothing. A hush spread through the room. Some lowered their heads. A few bit their lips, fighting tears. The nurse who had slapped her looked down at the floor, her pride shattered. Denise shifted her baby slightly, holding him securely. This child will grow up in a world where I hope kindness means something, she continued. But what I saw here today tells me this hospital has lost its way. Compassion is not optional in this profession, it is the heart of it. And when compassion is missing, the entire system fails. Her words struck deeply. The director felt sweat on his forehead. Staff members shifted uncomfortably, realizing the seriousness of the moment. Denise paused, letting her words sink in. She then looked directly at the nurse who had slapped her. You, she said softly. The nurse lifted her eyes, trembling. Denise's gaze was steady. You forgot what it means to care. You forgot that every patient deserves dignity. And in doing so, you disgraced not only yourself but this entire institution. The nurse opened her mouth to plead, but no words came. She simply stood frozen, knowing there was nothing she could say to undo what had been done. Denise then turned back to the entire group. This is not just about one slap. It is about the silence that followed. The silence of those who watched and chose to do nothing. That silence is dangerous. It destroys trust. It costs lives. The room was silent, except for the quiet cooing of her baby. Everyone stood still, waiting, their hearts pounding, realizing that the decision she was about to make would change everything. In that moment, Denise felt the full weight of her role, not just as a mother, but as a leader. She had the power to change this hospital's culture forever. She knew what had to be done. And with calm, steady resolve, she prepared to speak words that would shake the foundation of the hospital itself. Denise stood in the middle of the hospital hall with her baby in her arms, surrounded by a crowd of nurses, doctors, assistants, and other staff. The director stood to one side, his face pale, unsure what to do. Patients who had witnessed the earlier events lingered at the edges, whispering, waiting to see what would unfold. The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that pressed down on everyone's chest. Denise, however, looked calm. Her cheek still carried the faint red mark of the slap, but her eyes held no fear, only quiet determination. She took a slow breath and began to speak. Her voice wasn't loud, but every person in that room heard her clearly. This morning, I came here as a mother. I came holding my child, hoping he would receive care in this hospital. Instead, I was humiliated. I was treated with cruelty. And I was struck across the face while holding my baby. Her words sent another wave of shock through the staff. Some glanced at the nurse who had done it, others kept their eyes on the floor. Denise shifted her baby gently against her shoulder and continued, "What makes it worse is that many of you watched. You saw it happen, and you chose silence. Not one of you stepped forward to stop it. Not one of you spoke up. That silence, to me, is just as painful as the slap." A few staff members lowered their heads in shame. The nurse who had hit Denise looked as though she might collapse. She wrung her hands nervously, searching for words that wouldn't come. The director rubbed his forehead, realizing that the situation was far beyond his control now. Denise paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then she said, "This is not about me alone. This is about every patient who has walked through these doors. Hospitals are not only about medicine. They are about compassion, dignity, and respect. Without those things, all the medicine in the world cannot heal." Her words carried a weight that made even the strongest staff members swallow hard. At last, the nurse who had struck her tried to speak. Her voice trembled as she said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean," but Denise lifted her hand and stopped her. "No," she said softly but firmly. "This is not the time for excuses. An apology cannot erase the truth of what you did, nor can it undo the silence of those who let it happen." The nurse's shoulders slumped. She knew there was nothing she could say to defend herself. Denise turned her gaze back to the staff. "I am not just a patient. I am also the owner of this hospital chain. I came here quietly, without announcing who I was, because I wanted to see how people are truly treated. And today, I saw the truth. I saw arrogance. I saw cruelty. I saw silence." Her words sent murmurs rippling through the room. Many staff members looked as though the ground had been pulled out from beneath them. The director's eyes widened, and he took a step back, realizing how much authority stood before him. Denise's voice grew steadier, stronger. "I cannot allow this culture to continue. I cannot allow patients' mothers, fathers, children, the elderly to suffer at the hands of those who have forgotten their duty. That ends today." The room went completely still. Staff held their breath, waiting. The baby stirred in Denise's arms, and she kissed his forehead gently before continuing. "Effective immediately," she said, her words slicing through the silence, "every staff member who stood here and did nothing will be dismissed. And you," she looked directly at the nurse who had slapped her, "are no longer welcome in this hospital. You will not touch another patient again under this roof." Gasps spread through the crowd. Some nurses covered their mouths, shocked. Others stared at the floor, realizing their careers at this hospital were over. The nurse who had slapped her shook her head in disbelief, whispering, Please, please, I need this job," but Denise did not waver. "You needed compassion more than this job," she said quietly. "And you lost it?" Tears filled the nurse's eyes, but no mercy came. Denise turned her attention back to the group. "If you chose silence today, then you are part of the problem. And I cannot build a hospital on silence." The director cleared his throat nervously. "Madam Chairwoman, perhaps we could." Denise cut him off gently. "No. This is not up for negotiation. This hospital belongs to the community, not to pride, not to arrogance. I will rebuild it with people who understand compassion. Those who cannot meet that standard will not be here." Her words hit hard. Some staff members began to cry softly. Others stared at the floor, their faces pale with regret. The patients at the edges of the room looked at one another in awe. They had never seen anyone speak with such calm authority, never seen someone stand up so firmly for what was right. Denise continued, "From this day forward, compassion will be the first rule of this hospital. Skills matter, training matters, but if you cannot treat patients with dignity, you do not belong here. Every patient deserves to be seen, heard, and respected. If you cannot give that, you will not work under my roof." The weight of her words filled the hall. No one dared to move. Denise's baby let out a soft coo, and she smiled briefly down at him before raising her eyes again. "I hope you all understand the meaning of what happened here today," she said. "A hospital without compassion is not a hospital at all. It is only a building. I refuse to let this place become just another building." Her voice softened slightly, though it still carried strength. "Some of you may leave today in tears, angry or ashamed. Some of you may stay and help rebuild this hospital into what it should be. But every one of you will remember this moment. You will remember that silence is not harmless. It allows cruelty to grow." The staff stood frozen, her words echoing in their minds. The nurse who had slapped her finally covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. But no one came to comfort her. Everyone knew this was the consequence of her own choices. Denise looked around one last time. "The decision is made," she said. "Those who must go will be escorted out. Those who remain will undergo new training and be reminded of what compassion truly means. This is not a punishment. This is a chance to restore what has been lost." With that, she turned, still holding her baby, and walked slowly toward the director. The director bowed his head, humbled, and whispered, "Yes, Madam Chairwoman. We will carry out your orders." Denise nodded. She didn't need to say more. The message had already been delivered, louder than any shout could have been. The waiting room remained silent long after she walked out, her child safe in her arms. Every person in that hospital knew they had witnessed something unforgettable, a moment that would change the place forever. And Denise knew, as she stepped into the sunlight outside, that she had just planted the seeds of a new future, not just for her baby, but for every patient who would ever walk through those doors again. The air outside the hospital felt different when Denise finally stepped through the doors. She carried her baby in her arms, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blouse, his head resting peacefully against her chest. The bright sunlight kissed her face, a sharp contrast to the heavy silence she had left behind inside the hospital walls. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky, taking a deep breath of fresh air. Her cheek, though still faintly sore from the slap, no longer carried the same weight. What lingered now was not pain but a sense of purpose. Word of what had just happened began to spread almost instantly. Patients who had been in the waiting room whispered to others as they left the hospital. Within hours, stories began appearing online, people describing how a young mother holding her baby had revealed herself as the owner of the hospital and fired staff who had shown no compassion. Some wrote with admiration, calling it an act of courage. Others expressed disbelief, wondering if it could really be true. But for those who had been there in person, the memory was already etched into their minds forever. Inside the hospital, changes started almost immediately. The director, shaken but obedient, began carrying out Denise's orders. The nurse who had struck her left the building quietly, tears streaming down her face. Other staff members who had remained silent also packed up their belongings, their hearts heavy with regret. A few tried to protest, pleading for another chance, but Denise's calm decision had been final. To her, it wasn't about punishing people, it was about protecting the dignity of every future patient who would walk through those doors. The remaining staff gathered later that day, uncertain of what the future held. Denise returned with her baby and spoke to them once more, this time in a smaller meeting room. Her voice was gentle but steady. "I know today has been difficult," she told them. "But this is not the end. It is the beginning. I will bring in new people, people who understand that compassion is not just a word. It is a practice. It is a way of life." She looked around at the faces of the staff who remained, some frightened, some hopeful. "If you choose to stay, you will go through new training. You will be reminded of why you chose this profession in the first place. You will learn again how to treat patients not just with skill but with kindness. Her words were not cruel. They were hopeful, like a teacher reminding her students of their true potential. Many of the staff members who stayed behind felt a spark reignite in their hearts. They remembered why they had wanted to become nurses or doctors in the first place. Not for power or pride, but to serve, to heal, to make a difference. The following weeks brought transformation. Job postings were sent out, and new hires came in, people carefully chosen not only for their qualifications but also for their humanity. During interviews, Denise asked unusual questions. Tell me about a time you showed kindness when no one was watching. Tell me about a patient you listened to, not just treated. These questions puzzled some, but to Denise, they revealed the character behind the resume. Slowly, the atmosphere in the hospital began to shift. Patients noticed it first. They walked in and were greeted warmly. They were spoken to gently, not rushed or dismissed. Nurses bent down to speak kindly to children, receptionists smiled and asked how people were feeling, and doctors took the time to explain procedures patiently. Word spread quickly in the community, something had changed in the hospital. It felt alive again, filled with care instead of coldness. Denise often walked the halls quietly with her baby, observing. She watched how patients were treated, how staff interacted with one another. Each time she saw a moment of kindness, a nurse holding an elderly patient's hand, a doctor listening carefully to a worried mother, she smiled. It was proof that her painful experience had not been in vain. Outside the hospital, the media picked up the story. Headlines ran, "Hospital owner mistaken for patient, fires staff after mistreatment and compassion restored, a mother's stand changes everything." Denise received messages from strangers thanking her for standing up not just for herself but for all patients. Some shared their own painful stories of being dismissed or mistreated in hospitals, and they expressed hope that her bold action would inspire change everywhere. Not everyone approved, of course. Some critics said she had been too harsh, that firing so many people at once would damage the hospital. But Denise remained steady. Kindness is not optional, she told one reporter. If people cannot understand that, they cannot serve patients. This hospital will never again be a place where silence covers cruelty. Her baby grew quickly in those weeks, his tiny body becoming stronger each day. Often, Denise thought of how her decision was not only about the patients but also about the world her child would grow up in. She wanted him to know that his mother had chosen to stand for dignity, even when it was difficult. She wanted him to inherit not just a hospital but a legacy of compassion. One afternoon, weeks after the incident, Denise returned to the same waiting room where everything had begun. The chairs were the same, the walls unchanged, but the feeling was different. A young nurse bent down to help an older man with his paperwork, smiling patiently as he struggled with his glasses. A receptionist offered a kind word to a mother with 2 children, helping her calm them as she waited. The energy in the room felt warm, welcoming. Denise sat quietly in the corner with her baby, unnoticed. She wanted it that way. She wanted to see the true picture when no one thought she was watching. As she rocked her child gently, she thought back to that painful morning, the sting of the slap, the humiliation, the silence of the crowd. It had been one of the hardest moments of her life, but also one of the most defining. From that moment had come change, and from change had come hope. Later that day, she stood in her office, looking out over the city skyline with her baby in her arms. She whispered softly to him, "You gave me strength that day. You reminded me what matters most. And now, because of you, this place is better." The hospital would never be the same again. It would carry the memory of that morning forever, a reminder of what happens when silence meets cruelty, and how one mother's courage can break the silence and restore compassion. Patients would come and go, lives would be saved and healed, but the heart of the hospital had been rewritten. Denise closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of her baby's breathing. She knew challenges would come again, as they always do, but she also knew that compassion would guide her through. Her cheek had healed, but more importantly, her spirit had grown stronger. What began with humiliation ended with transformation. And so, with her child in her arms and a new sense of peace in her heart, Denise smiled. The world might not always be kind, but she had proven that kindness, when chosen with courage, could change everything.